Hello class, this is your teacher Mr. McDougall with your next Premiere Pro tutorial. In this one we're still getting started. We're going to learn about keyframes, aka the Ken Burns effect. Without going into too much history, Ken Burns is a documentary filmmaker who pioneered the idea of adding motion to images. So I'll show you an example in just a second, but what I'm giving you for the exercise files is just going to be photographs, and we're going to turn them into a video file. So as usual, download and extract the exercise files, and then you can bring them into Premiere Pro. First, put them into a project folder. Again, it's very crucial that you create a project folder with the same name and then put the entire exercise folder in there. So if I click here, here are the exercise files I've given you. When you open Premiere Pro, open it up, and then as always, go to New Project. Every time we create something, it's going to be a new project. Give it the same name, 602 Keyframes, and as always, you must tell it where to save. So click the drop down, choose a location, and pick the spot where it's going to be. It's going to be in my Keyframes one. Don't save it in the folder with the exercise files, just save it in the Keyframes folder that you created. So let's click save. Make sure this is still checked. We do not want to go into import mode, and then hit create. So now we have our blank workspace. Again, it should be on the editing software. So go to Window, Workspaces. Make sure you are on the editing one. We will always be on this one for about 99% of the time in this course. So let's import our files. The best way to import is to just have Premiere open and drag this entire folder into the media bin. So this is our exercise files. Let's just drag this whole folder, drop it right in there. Now we have everything in a folder. If I click this folder, it opens up and I could see the 6 keyframe exercise files. And you'll notice again, these are JPEGs. I've only given you images. If you scrub over them, nothing happens because they're not video files, they're just pictures. As I mentioned, the Ken Burns effect. Ken Burns is someone who came up with the idea that if you, instead of just doing a slideshow, you can add motion to the videos like this, zooming in, panning around, something like that, just to create more interest in the photo. Whenever you have a shot in your video, it's 100 times more interesting if there's movement in it as opposed to a static shot where there's no movement at all. Anytime you can add movement, it becomes way more interesting. So that's what we're going to do. So let me show you. We are going to do that with keyframes. So start adding your pictures to the timeline. You can add them all in there back to back. Add every single one of them in there back to back. You can put them in any order that you would like. I'll just put them in the same order that they're numbered, but feel free to mix them up. So if you want to switch them around, you can always switch them like that, or however you want to do it is totally fine. So remember that whenever you create a sequence, it creates this. It creates a sequence file that has the same name as the first file that you put down. So this is the file, but this is the sequence. This, I want to change the name to sequence 1. That will change it up here so I don't get confused and think there's 2 copies of this file, because that is not the case. So when you put an image on a timeline, by default, Premiere Pro puts it at around 5 seconds. So you can see each one of these images is just around 4.5 to 5 seconds right there. So once you put all 6 of them down, the total length of your video will be about right here, just shy of 30 seconds. It's at 29.24 seconds. So by default, if I play the video, so I'm playing the video right now, as you can see the timer's running as it transitions between them. They're just static images. They're perfectly still. So if you're looking at that like slideshow style, you would think that's pretty boring. So we're going to add a little bit more interest to it by adding motion to all of these. So we're going to do that with keyframes. So let's start with this very first one. I'm going to click on the first one, and then I'm going to go to Effect Controls right here, this tab. This is your Effect Controls tab. If it looks blank like this, it's because it says no clip is selected. Make sure you click on the clip you want to use. If I click here, then ta-da, this opens up just like that. Yours will probably look like this with all of these little menus closed. Remember, just like in the other programs in Lightroom and Photoshop, you can open up the menus when you see these little arrows right here. These arrows will open and close the menus. So the one we're going to focus on today is this one for motion right here, because that's what we're going to create. So click the drop down for motion, and we're just going to stick with these two at the top, position and scale. That's what we're going to change for each of these photos. So the scale controls the size or the zoom. So right now this is at 100, which means it's at 100%. It's filling the whole frame. If you hover your mouse over these blue numbers, anytime you see blue numbers, you can hover your mouse over it and you'll see that my mouse turns into a little finger. What happens when you do that is if you click and hold your mouse and drag it to the left or the right, it will change the numbers. So if I click and hold my mouse and drag it to the left, it makes the numbers smaller. Like that, and I'm at 50. So now I'm at 50%. So that's why it only looks like it's taking up half of the screen. So the smaller the number will make it zoom out, filling up less space. If I click and hold my mouse and drag it to the right, it zooms in and the number gets bigger. So I'm dragging my mouse, clicking and holding to the right to do that. Now I'm at 200%. So now it's more zoomed in. The other thing you can do, if you get confused on which number you are at, you can obviously hit Control-Z to go back, or you can just click on the number one time and then type in a number. So I can type in 100, hit enter, and it goes back to 100 where it was. So let's change the scale for this one in order to create the zoom effect. So for this one, take your blue playhead, which is the CTI, remember the current time indicator telling us what time we're at. We're going to take it and put it near the beginning. You can see when I move it up here that it's moving it down here as well. They're connected. It's showing where it's at on this particular file. So let's move it to the left, which is near the beginning. Not all the way like that, just a little bit towards the beginning, right about there. And the way we create a keyframe is this stopwatch icon where it says toggle animation. So once I'm ready to change the scale, I'm going to click this stopwatch. So I click the stopwatch, it turns blue, as you can see, and it's got a little hand showing it's running. It creates this blue keyframe, and it creates this dot right here, saying that now it's tracking when the scale changes. So at this point in time, it knows that the scale needs to be at 100%. If I move it more to the right, towards the end, and now if I change the scale, I'm going to drag this to zoom it in. As soon as I do that, you'll notice a keyframe will pop up right here. So I'm going to start dragging this to the right to zoom in. Let's say right about there. So now you'll see I have two of these keyframes right here. So at this point in time, it's at 100, and at this point in time, it's at 194. So now when I play the video, as it goes between these two keyframes, it will change from 100 to 194 and create a zoom out. Or zoom in. Like that. And then it stops once it passes this point. The distance between these two keyframes will control the speed of the effect. So they're pretty far away, so that's why it has a nice steady zoom like that. But if I move them closer together, if I take this keyframe and I move it this way closer, and I take this one and move it closer, now they're really close together, so now the zoom is going to happen much faster. Like that, since there's a shorter time frame. What will happen as well, anytime you change these numbers while this stopwatch is running, you will create more keyframes. So be careful. We only want to create these two. If you start trying to figure out how to move this stuff and you do this and then you change this number again, I've just created another keyframe because the stopwatch is still running. So now what will happen is if I play, it's going to go between all of these points. It's going to zoom in and then zoom back out because of these keyframes. If you do that on accident, just click on it and hit delete to get rid of it. We just want the two to make a zoom like that. We're going to have a nice slow zoom. So take this keyframe, take your first one, move it all the way to the left, and now take this one and move it all the way to the right. So now the entire image as it plays will do this nice steady zoom in like that. Perfect. Let's go to the next one. So now we're going to start editing this next one. Be careful, just like when I told you about the color correction, be careful of which clip you have selected. Even though I've moved my playhead over here now, I don't have this clip selected. This still thinks I'm working on the first file, so that's incorrect. You want to click on this one, so now it knows I'm working on this second file, keyframe 2. That's this one. So make sure you have the right clip selected as well. We're going to do the same thing for this one, except we're going to change the position to control a pan movement. So you'll notice with position, you can do the same thing. You can slide these blue numbers, but there's two numbers this time. The one on the left This controls sliding the image to the left and the right. See, if I drag it now, it moves left and right. This number controls it moving up and down. If I drag this, it goes up and down. So you can change where you want the position to be. So let's do a pan. Let's start on one side of the frame and move it to the other. So let's drag this so it moves this way. So we drag it a little bit off to the side, but we're going to zoom in a little bit because you have to watch out for this. You don't want to have just this black empty space, because when you play the video, you'll just have this black bar, and we don't want that. So let's zoom in a little bit to start. Let's scoot over a little bit more to the right. There's no keyframes yet because I haven't clicked the stopwatches. As long as I don't click the stopwatches, it's not tracking any movement. Now if I play the video, it's still just going to stay right there. Nothing has changed yet until I create those stopwatches. So let's start it right about there. Let's do what we just did. Let's hit the position stopwatch right there. So now the stopwatch is running. It says there's a keyframe right here. So when the video starts, it will start right there. Let's move it down the line a little bit to the right, further down the video. And let's change the position. Let's change this one on the left. Drag it over here. There we go. As far as you would like to go. Let's say right about there. So now between these two keyframes, the position will change. It will start on this side, and as I hit play, it pans over to the right side. And you can see as it passes this keyframe, it doesn't know what to do anymore, so it stops. It passes the keyframe and it stops right there. So do what we just did before. Drag these keyframes all the way to the outside. So now it creates a nice, slow, steady pan. Perfect. All right, so for the third one, whichever image you have as your third one, same thing. Let's put the playhead right here and click on this clip to select it, because this should be blank when you get started, so you have the right clip selected. Let's do one for both. Let's do both the position and the scale at the same time. So let's choose a starting point. Let's start zoomed in on something. How about, I'm going to change the scale to zoom in, and I can change the position. So find a fun starting point you want to start at. Just start changing. I haven't done the stopwatch yet. I'm just dragging these numbers to the left and the right to see what happens. I'm going to start right on his face. How about that? Let's say I'm going to start right there. So once you find your starting point and your playhead is towards the left side, let's click our stopwatches. We're going to click both stopwatches, scale and position. So now you see it's tracking both. It only tracks as soon as you start those stopwatches. So now let's move it down this way towards the end, and let's start changing it. Let's start zooming out a little bit. And let's just start adjusting these. Let's create a zoom out. So you're going to have to just start sliding these around. Like that. So I'm starting to zoom out. There we go. So I'm going to want to zoom out. I know I want it to be back at 100 so it fills the whole frame. But now I just need to change the position. There we go. Right about there. And let's say right about there. That looks good. I've just been changing these numbers around. You can type in numbers or you can just scroll with your mouse. So now I have these two keyframes right here. So now it's going to change both. As I start here and I hit play, it's changing the scale. So it's doing the zoom out but also pan at the same time. So it's kind of zooming at an angle at this diagonal right here. To move both of them, you can move each keyframe or you can select both. If I click and drag my mouth like this, I can select it and I can move both the keyframes together. I can select both of these and move them together. Remember, the closer they are is the shorter time distance, so it zooms much faster. But let's space it out like we did before. Just drag this, drag these. Remember, be careful as you move your playhead. If you change any of these numbers, it will create another keyframe. If I change this, it just made another keyframe, and that will start to confuse the zoom, because now it's going to zoom to this point and then do something else. If I zoom right here and I zoom in again like that, now all these keyframes are being created because these stopwatches are running. So now it's going to be confused on trying to figure out how to get between all these keyframes. See, it goes like that, and then it zooms this way, and then it zooms back out. That's not what we want to do. So if that ever happens, just highlight the keyframes you made by mistake and hit the delete button to get rid of them. Just like that. So on the remaining 3 files, I want you to practice those again. On whatever 3 you have left, practice just a simple zoom by only doing stopwatch for the scale. On the next one, create a pan by only changing the stopwatch for position. And on the last one, do both. Again, just like we did, change the scale and position for your last exercise file. So all 6 video clips, or all 6 images, become video clips and having this motion attached to it. Just like before, as soon as you finish, make sure that you export your video and turn in the video. So when you're all done, you're going to go to export. It'll be sequence 1. Make sure you save it in the right space. Don't save it into your workspace one from the previous assignment. Save it into the Keyframes one. So hit save, and then you'll hit export. It will take just a couple of seconds to export, and then you will turn in your video. So if you go to your folder, you will see this one with the traffic cone, sequence 1. That will be the file that you turn in. Do not turn in the purple project folder. That is just the project itself. That's not anything that I can watch. Okay? Perfect. So have fun. Let me know if you have any questions as usual.